As said in my introduction, I'm here representing the National Writing Project, and before I begin, I'd like to say a few words about the Writing Project. The Writing Project is a 40-year-old professional development organization in the United States. It connects teachers across the 50 states to develop teaching, to become writers, to develop their teaching of writing, and then to develop their leadership in the teaching of writing. So basically, the Writing Project has developed over 40 years a large and expansive community of teacher writers who work together to continue to improve practice in the teaching of writing. During this talk, I'll draw on the history of the Writing Project and on the teachers there. Sorry, I'm learning to use this computer as I talk. And the teachers there who are really building an educational movement in the United States around the importance of writing as central to education in a democracy. I'm going to share research about how young people are using digital internet-connected tools to advance their learning and interests through writing, and point to design principles for an educational model that we call connected learning. But we start at the beginning, which at the Writing Project is writing. I'd like to start with writing, and actually I'd like to start by writing. At every National Writing Project convening, whether it's a conference, a professional development experience, a meeting, sometimes even lunch, we start by writing together. These are a couple of quotes from my colleagues, teachers in the National Writing Project. The first from a Writing Project director who wrote a piece called 1,000 Writers Writing about his experience of being in a conference room, much like this one, but larger, with 1,000 people who suddenly opened their notebooks, took out their pens, and began writing, and his first surprise and then appreciation of that practice. The second, the picture in the bottom, is of my colleague, Bud Hunt. He is known in the blogosphere as Bud the Teacher, if you want to find him. And he writes about teaching, writing, and learning. And he wrote a blog post for the National Writing Project's 40th anniversary, in which he describes an experience of running into another teacher who says, "Oh, you're that guy who makes us write." Bud says about that, "This is, of course, a habit in the National Writing Project. We are well trained to begin any significant meeting, event, sometimes a meal, with a few minutes of silent writing together. It prepares us. It unpacks our baggage and helps us focus on what we're about to do together. That is a good thing, a powerful thing, an essential thing." I'd like us to take a few minutes to write together because I'd like to use that experience throughout the talk this morning to think about the good, the power, and the essential essence of writing and of writing together. I keep pushing the wrong button. You can't see it, thank goodness. Okay, here we go. In case it might be helpful, I offer an image and a prompt that you can write to, but you can always choose to write about something completely different. I'm asking this morning, what's worth waking up for? I'll set a timer and we'll take 7 minutes to write. I'll write in English, of course, but you should feel free also, of course, to write in Danish. When the timer goes off, we'll come back together and we'll hold on to that experience and refer to it throughout the day. So, what's worth waking up for? Come to a place where you can stop, please. I'd like to welcome everyone who arrived while we were writing. I hope you had a chance to do some writing yourselves. I'd ask you to set that writing aside for now, though through the rest of the talk I may ask you to reflect on this experience. Though it is somewhat contrived, we'll use this moment of writing to think about and reflect on the importance of writing. We're gonna, I'd like to say that you might just turn to someone and say, I just wrote something. But you might just as well turn to someone and say, I just made something. 7 minutes ago, you had a blank piece of paper and a pen or a blinking cursor and a blank screen. We could call these your tools. You had words and a few punctuation marks and all of your knowledge and expertise and experiences that you bring to this morning. You might have had a bad taxi ride, such as I did, or spilled coffee all over your dress this morning. That came with you. Those are your raw materials when somebody says, okay, open your notebook and start writing. From those raw materials available to you, and with the tools that you have, you chose carefully, or as carefully as you could in 7 minutes, the words that would say exactly what you wanted to say. You put them together in an orderly fashion. You may have arranged and rearranged them. Suddenly, okay, here we go. Suddenly, where there weren't any, there were brand new sentences that had never existed. You put these together in a certain order. You might have had to go back and rearrange them, which was easier if you were using a computer cursor than your pen, or to squeeze one more sentence in where it hadn't been, or tear one out altogether. It's no wonder that lots of writers talk about writing in metaphors of building. Take this one, for example. Read everything, trash, classics, good and bad, and see how they do it. Just like a carpenter who works as an apprentice and studies the master. Read, you'll absorb, and then write. That was William Faulkner. Or this sentence by Annie Dillard. One line of a poem, the poet said, only one line, but thank God for that one line. Drops from the ceiling, and you tap in the others around it with a jeweler's hammer. If you doubt me that you were a maker in this moment, let me ask you if you had any of these feelings. Did you have a palpable sense of frustration where you couldn't find the right words? Did you feel a sudden surge of empowerment when you got it right or had a sentence that was, yes, exactly what you wanted to say? Did you use thought and choice and selection among the huge vocabularies that you brought to the task to pick just the right word or just the right sentence? Did you find yourself thinking carefully and about the craft, about rearranging those sentences or putting one word in place of another? Did you, in the course of writing one thing, suddenly discover that there was something else you wanted to say? If you had any of those experiences, you wrote something, you made something. The writing project operates on the principle that if we organize education around this idea of students as production centers, as students as producers, not just consumers, we'll create more powerful learning opportunities for young people and more equitable futures for our communities. Let me say a little bit more about why I think that is. Let's talk about how or why focusing on the productive capacities of young people is so important. And let's start by thinking back to the writing you just did. Do you wish you had more time to make it? Would you actually like to remake some of it now? Are you actually, right now, sneakily writing down a few more sentences or words because you're not quite done? So why are you doing that? You're not handing that writing in for a grade. You don't have to hand it over to get your lunch ticket. You're probably not going to get paid for those lines, at least not in the shape they are in right now. At least not probably. And yet many of you feel a little bit attached to that thing you made. Why is that? Researchers at the Harvard School of Business, Yale University, and Duke University have come up with a name for this. They call it the IKEA effect. They've done experiments with people making furniture, origami, and Lego assemblies, and they've demonstrated that self-assembly impacts the evaluation of a product by its consumers. The experiment results suggest that when people use their own labor to create something, they value it more than if they didn't put any effort into its creation, and that holds true even if the final project isn't that good. Writing, I would argue, is the opportunity, the sort of most classic academic opportunity for our young people in schools to make something that they feel ownership over, responsibility for, connection to. At its best, it's an act of discovery rather than an act of reporting. It's the writing that we do that allows students to figure out what they know or believe or are thinking rather than, for example, summarizing what they've read to prove that they've done the reading. In these opportunities to make something that's new and that is theirs, young people get a bit of the IKEA effect. They get to say, this is mine, I made it. That's one thing that makes writing very powerful, in my opinion, is the IKEA effect, or the fact that it's production-centered. Writing is also participatory and social. You didn't just stand here and listen to me, you all took out your notebooks and you did something. Many of you are wanting to share it right now. Maybe you already did. Maybe you emailed it off to your best friend. Maybe you traded notebooks with the person you're sitting next to. Maybe you're just waiting to go to lunch, sit next to people you know so that you can say, hey, this is what I did. What did you say what was worth getting up for? If you haven't, though, or if you even haven't thought about it, I'd like to ask you, if you would, share something, some part of what you wrote today. You don't have to, but if you'd like to, or are at least willing, I'd like you to group up with 3 or 4 people, well, 3 people, no more than a group of 4, and take just a minute, which won't be enough if you wrote for 7 minutes, to share everything you wrote. So right now think about what's a minute's worth of writing that you did that you would be willing to share. I'm going to again set the timer. It will go off 4 times. Each time that it goes off, you should point to the next person in your group and let them share their writing. So let's go ahead and try that. Shall we find yourself a little group? If you are willing to sing like that, I know you can read your writing together. So let's go ahead and get started. Each time the timer goes off, you'll change readers. speakers last minute. To draw that sharing portion to a close and say that you've now heard my two favorite times in the classroom, the absolute drop-dead silence of people engaged in writing together, and then the joyous, raucous noise of everyone participating and sharing. So writing is productive, and writing is participatory and social. And in sharing something you wrote, you shared some part of yourself. And it doesn't matter how many times I've done this with people from first graders through octogenarians, the same thing happens. You hear laughter. You hear a sharp intake of breath. You hear appreciation. You have, in those 4 minutes, staked an identity claim, at least for the moment. Maybe you're the funny guy. Maybe you're the person with the beautiful vocabulary. Maybe you're the serious student. Perhaps also your words had an impact on someone else. Did you make somebody laugh or cry? Did you take someone's breath away? Our young people aren't only hungry to make something, they're also really hungry to make a difference. Youth who live in my country or yours, whether they personally have plenty or not, see a world of plenty. And at the same time, they see an earth with a climate in crisis, a huge disparity of wealth and poverty across the world, and a devolution into war and violence in many places. They want to know what to do about this. They want to know their place in making the world better. And more, they see images of possibility to write a way to difference. Writing is powerful because it's productive, because it's participatory and social, and because it can make a difference. So from our few minutes of writing together, as well as our lifetimes of experience as teachers, mine in the National Writing Project, working with teachers around the United States, I've argued those 3 things about writing. And yet right now, you and I, we're using the tools mostly that I had as a child. You may have used a screen today, but unless you posted that writing on your blog or tweeted it out to someone or shared it via email, you're basically using the same tools that I used 40 years ago. When I was a young child, I had a best friend whose parents had a manual typewriter that they let us have. She also had a giant desk shoved in an alcove under the stairs in her house. And we spent hours in there writing poems. We would write them first by hand, and then when we thought they were final, we'd type them on our typewriter. And then we stored them in a shoebox in that alcove under the stairs. And whenever our parents would throw a dinner party or some kind of party, we'd open up the poetry store, and you could come by and browse our selection and buy a poem for a nickel if you were interested. But I want to extrapolate from our own experience, and I want to think about what that young entrepreneurial poet could do in the world today. And I want to think about three things. There's a monitor down here. It suddenly went blank. Did yours go blank? Tell me if it does. I want to talk about the tools, both of production and distribution of writing. I want to talk about the costs of those tools. And I want to talk about the networkedness of the world in which we live. You had a pen and a piece of paper, or maybe a laptop. Here's a vision of a set of icons that we put together. Actually, I've been using the same set of icons for over a year now, and I was thinking about my own daughter who's sitting down here in the front row, probably with her phone out, quite likely taking pictures of everything that's going on and posting them on Instagram. We've posted pictures of every Danish food we've eaten so far in the last 2 days. Maybe tweeting about the experience, maybe Snapchatting her friends to say, we're in the Black Diamond. It's one of the most beautiful libraries in the world. And those images for Snapchat, Twitter, Instagram aren't even on this list, but each one of these things represents a powerful tool of either production of writing or some other kind of making, like taking photographs or making music, and distributing those things. And these tools are quite literally at the fingertips of most of our young people. What was unthinkable in my own childhood, to own your own computer, is now the way we live. Our computing devices become smaller and less expensive and better every year. I own a new laptop so thin that in the first weeks I traveled with it, I was terrified I would leave it somewhere because I couldn't even feel the difference whether it was in my backpack or not in my backpack. I'm using a laptop computer and another computing device, both at my fingertips, standing up here in front of you, both wireless. And as you can see, the devices are on sale and the prices are falling, which means that they're accessible by virtually every one of the young people we work with. And not only are they powerful means of production, but they're also powerful means of distribution. It wasn't so long ago that one person thought, oh, I could connect my computer to another computer, which led to the idea that a single computer could be connected to and send information to many computers. But something significant happened in the way we work and learn and make and share together when the idea occurred that all computers could be connected to all other computers. It became an explosion of connectivity. If this is the world in which we live, in which young people can make things and have powerful tools to make things, and then can send them anywhere in the world to anyone and everyone, we have to ask ourselves as educators, how can our young people make the most of today's abundance of information, creative potential, and social connection? And one way to answer that question is to ask ourselves, how are young people making the most of today's abundance of information, creative potential, and social connection? Last year, Mimi Ito and a team of researchers published a digital youth study. Ito sent 25 researchers to do 800 interviews, to distribute 4,000 questionnaires, and to do 5,000 hours of observation. This fieldwork took place between 2005 and 2008 and yielded 22 case studies. There's follow-up work underway. This was the largest and most extensive US study of youth media use to date. Ito and her researchers found, you won't be surprised, that social network and video sharing sites, online games, and gadgets such as iPods and mobile phones are now fixtures in today's youth culture. The research shows that today's youth may be coming of age and struggling for autonomy and identity amid new worlds of communication, friendship, play, and self-expression. They found that many adults worry that children are wasting time online, texting or playing video games. But they also explain why youth find these activities compelling and important. The digital world is creating new opportunities for youth to grapple with social norms, explore interests, develop technical skills, experiment with new forms of self-expression. These activities have captured teens' attention because they provide avenues for extending social worlds, self-directed learning, and independence. Chill out, grown-ups. Adults, let's remember, in general, and this was a few years ago, and it may not pertain, but many adults are worried that their children are wasting their time. But let's think about some of the extraordinary amount of learning that takes place just in the everyday use of these tools. There is the taken for granted technical literacy of getting around in an online world. What would have been considered technically sophisticated 10 years ago may be considered technically sophisticated among people of a certain generation is taken for granted among young people. Let's think about their social competencies of figuring out how to hang out, date, and get along with their friends in this new environment. More importantly, I think for our work, some kids are going a step farther and doing highly engaged forums of learning, creative work, and civic engagement online. These are the youth we hear about that are called digital youth, and they are even now a minority, but they're important because they show us the potential of what all young people could achieve with support and mentorship. So your kids are on Facebook or wherever they're hanging out online, actually. I was privy to a long conversation among a certain set of 14-year-olds discussing the fact that because all their parents now had Instagram accounts, Instagram was soon to be dead. They know this because all their parents have Facebook accounts, and therefore Facebook among youth is dead. They're hanging out somewhere. Oh, sorry, I should go back and say that Ito's final report is called Hanging Out, Messing Around, Hanging Out, Messing Around, and Geeking Out. So yes, kids are hanging out online. They're practicing displays of status, they're flirting, they're gossiping, they're doing the kind of peer-to-peer sharing they've always been doing, and they're doing it online. It's ubiquitous, and it's an important part of their growing up. It's true, though, that new media, if this is the level of new media use among youth, it doesn't show us anything new about opportunities for learning. So there's a lot of hanging out online, no doubt. There's also some messing around. Messing around crosses from hanging out when the hanging out you're doing with your friends or other people online becomes interest-driven, maybe some learning, and definitely participation. So if you are a dancer and you use Instagram to follow your 5 favorite dancers and to post your development of a certain move over time, you're messing around with technology in order to follow an interest. Somebody described it this way: it's when you stop following Facebook, the people you went to school with, and start following Tumblr, the people you wish you went to school with. But what we would like to see is when youth move from hanging out, messing around, to geeking out. When they begin to be paying attention both to their learning and participation and production in these spaces. So what we're really interested in as educators is how are our young people making learning in the midst of this abundance of information, creative potential, and social connection. Again, researchers in the Digital Media and Learning Hub have extrapolated from Ito's study, and they're working on follow-up work trying to understand the sweet spot of learning in the digital internet-connected age. They've identified this nexus of interest, peer culture, and academic learning as that sweet spot, which they call connected learning. I'm going to show you a visual that I know you can't make sense of, but if you Google connected learning, one of the first 3 things you'll find is this image. Don't try to read it. I can't even read it from up here, at least not without my glasses. But I would say to you that at the center is a learner, and the learner is at the center of their peer culture, their interests, their academic learning. And then in those pink boxes, it also imagines the way that they will work among those things. So they'll work in an openly networked environment where they can work with other people with a shared purpose. They'll work in a production-centered way, making something with others who share their interests and passions, whether the person is near or far. And so what we're interested in a lot in the Writing Project and at the Digital Media and Learning Hub is, what might this look like? Where do we see it happening? What are the examples? I'm going to offer 2, but there's so many. So one example I'd like to look at is NaNoWriMo. This is an international event / community. NaNoWriMo stands for National Novel Writing Month. I'm curious whether there are any nanos in here. There are in Denmark. I don't know where they are, but I checked the map, and they're definitely hanging out here. Basically, NaNoWriMo is a community of practice that lives online and agrees, insanely in my opinion, to write a 50,000-word novel in 30 days. Last year, 648,373 novelists completed this task. It happens in November, so get ready if I've piqued your curiosity. The community began as a community of practice of adults who shared a passion for writing. Actually, the first NaNoWriMo month took place in Berkeley, California, with some guy and 5 of his best friends who agreed to this challenge to meet each other. But in the years since that beginning, Nano's grown from a local group of a few friends to an international phenomenon with 500,000 participants, more than 500,000 participants each year. There are 9 million people in NaNoWriMo's database, 9 million people around the world who have signed up to try this at least once. And interestingly, I go places where I meet people who do this every year. Every November, they write a 50,000-word draft of a novel. Many teachers in the US, learning from their own Nano experience, have introduced NaNoWriMo into their curriculums, and many young people have found their own way to the Nano community, where they take on an extraordinary challenge. If you're under 18, you can set your own word count, so it doesn't have to be a 50,000-word novel. They take on this extraordinary challenge in a community of peers, young people. There's a young writers program, and also mentors who challenge and support them toward this goal. That's what learning in an online connected environment might look like. Here's another example. Scratch is a very different community, and yet it is a community. It's a community with 6,301,856 projects shared so far. It has a counter, so each time somebody uploads a project, that's the count as of 10 o'clock last night. With Scratch, you can program your own interactive stories, games, and animations and share your creations with others in an online community. So basically, if you go on Scratch and you're not a programmer, but you're interested, you can look at games and stories that other people, young people from the age of 5 to old people, the age of 95, code in Scratch and build games, cards, stories, interactive things. Scratch helps young people to think creatively, reason systematically, and work collaboratively by learning to code. Scratch is a project of the Lifelong Kindergarten Group at the MIT Media Lab, and it's led by Mitch Resnick. And if you're interested in learning more about Scratch, you can hear Mitch Resnick, who gave a TED Talk on this topic. So you can just TED Talk Mitch Resnick. Scratch is a free online community as well. These we would call examples of connected learning. The DML Hub has a new report called Connected Learning that seeks to move from Ito's research to understanding what this looks like in practice. And so the Connected Learning Hub has worked to bring together researchers, practitioners, and designers. A recent conference, as well as Connected Learning TV, which offers regular webinars exploring this rich learning space and what we might all do to increase student capacities to take advantage of learning in and outside of school, face-to-face and virtually through digital interconnected opportunities. Because we know that connected learners, not connected hanger-outers, but connected learners have unprecedented opportunities for learning, social connection, and production. Many people are making an argument from this truth that schools are dead and educators obsolete. I would argue the opposite, that more than ever, young people need schools and educators who understand the connected spaces in which they work and live, and therefore can mentor and help them to be not just hanger-outers, but learners. I want to look at two examples. One we're calling Making STEAM. Making STEAM has happened through a grant with the National Science Foundation. National Writing Project educators and Science Museum educators have been working together in Charlotte, North Carolina, to offer youth opportunities to make science learning visible through makes, and to reflect on, write about, and share their learning with others in an online G+ community called Making STEAM. In this closed online community, we find teachers, science museum educators, and youth who are thinking, learning, and writing together about science, technology, art, and writing. Another example from the United States is called Do Now. Do Now is hosted by KQED Education. KQED is a local public radio station in Berkeley, California, and the National Writing Project. Do Now is a weekly activity for students to engage and respond to current issues using social media tools like Twitter. Do Now aims to build civic engagement and digital literacies for young people. It's designed for use in schools, and it's been built and iterated through careful and close work with teachers and includes a teacher professional development component. This is important. If you don't use Twitter yourself, how are you going to help kids to think about what it means to responsibly tweet? If we don't think about, if we think that because young people can use Twitter, they know how to carefully and respectfully engage in civic debate, then I think we need to think again. Do we think they're going to learn that on their own? Maybe, but maybe not. Do we think that they'll learn that by writing for an audience of one, by writing for you and handing their papers into you? Probably not. When you say to students, this is not a respectful engagement in the question, or you haven't really considered multiple perspectives, sometimes they might just say, well, you just don't understand, miss, you're old. What we found, what Writing Project teachers found when they engaged in Do Now is that their students often spoke to the world as though they were speaking to the people in their own schools and communities. And sometimes that really worked out well for them, and sometimes people from another place, from another ethnicity, from another kind of community, spoke back to them and said, that's not a very carefully considered opinion, or perhaps you don't know someone like me, or perhaps you don't live here. And students could understand and hear one another. A student in Texas could understand and hear a youth in New York say these things to them in a way that they couldn't have that experience hearing those same words from their teacher. So Do Now started as a small case study. It's now has many teachers around the country who have their students participate. There's a question each week. There's some readings around that question, and then you weigh in on Friday in the Twitter sphere. You get a stream of tweets related to this topic, and you can see how is your idea being taken up, how does it compare to young people from around the country, and you begin to develop a civic sense of both how to speak to people near and far, and what impact your words might have when your tweet gets favorited or retweeted or responded to. These, again, I've now given you two examples of students in the world working in a connected way on their own, and two examples in which teachers are beginning to invest and understand that if their students are living in this digital, internet-connected world, that they have to provide experiences and mentorship and support. If you're convinced that writing matters in a digital, interconnected world, and that schools and teachers have to be part of the revolution that will be tweeted, then here are 4 things that we all can do. 1, we can support, help, and encourage learning institutions to transform themselves. 2, we can make sure that we recognize learning wherever it happens. 3, we can leverage the civic potential of writing and connected learning. And 4, we can continue to make investments in infrastructure, but more importantly, to build the human infrastructure. Let's start by thinking about supporting the reinvention of and by learning institutions. For an example, you can look at a network of learning institutions at the YOUmedia Network, called the YOUmedia Network. YOUmedia are spaces where kids explore, express, and create using digital media. YOUmedia's core philosophy is that youth are best engaged when they're following their passions, collaborating with others, and being makers and doers, not passive consumers. YOUmedia are transformative spaces and catalysts for new kinds of thinking about libraries, museums, and community centers. They're sites that are open, flexible, and highly creative, with inspiration zones, production zones, and exhibition labs, where youth can hang out, mess around, and geek out. YOUmedia programs grab young people where they are and inspire them to stretch their talents and interests in new ways. These are all pictures of YOUmedia centers that are located mostly in libraries around the United States, libraries where somebody said, it doesn't actually always have to be quiet in here. Maybe we could have a space within this space where kids can make some noise and make some stuff. So these are examples of digital music development. There's a DJ club in one. There's a lot of poetry production and performance in U-Media spaces. But we should ask ourselves, how might our schools reinvent themselves to have greater focus on student interests and productivity? 2, let's leverage the potential of digital media for civic engagement. Let's ask ourselves, how might your school or classroom make room for writing that involves students in the issues and civic life of your community or your country? How might that writing leverage digital media so that students can write for an audience greater than one, and so that their writing might, as we've discussed, have an impact? 3, continue investments in infrastructure, but more importantly, build the human infrastructure. Become an educator innovator. I've given you this URL too, educatorinnovator.org. Educator, I can never say this, Educator Innovator is both a blog and a network of networks devoted to creative and connected learning. If we want to educate a generation of young people to be innovators, to create, build, design, use their talents to improve the world, then I think this is a step that's being skipped in a lot of places. We need to value the creative capacity in their mentors and teachers who support them. Educator Innovator supports learning opportunities for teachers, youth workers, mentors, librarians, and museum educators that are open, remixable, and free or very low cost. You today could go to the Educator Innovator website. You could sign up. You could participate in webinars, although because of the time zone, you might just watch webinars unless you stay up really late at night. Or you can be inspired by what is being done by colleagues around the world who share an interest in connected and creative learning. I would close, actually, by inviting you to start a National Writing Project International affiliate site. Band together, support each other to write, to learn from that experience to teach writing, and then to lead others to teach writing. We would love it if you'd join us. Thank you.